jump in right ahead.
Cool. All right, everyone fire up their dev environments and all that jazz. So for those of you who were here last week or caught up from the notes or watched the video or whatever, last week was by far the hardest lesson. So if you got through last week, you're coasting now. Last week we did a lot. We talked about strong parameters, which was in itself a pretty complex subject. We sent a request for the first time that actually carried payload. So for the very first time, we sent a request, and it actually had data that went with it. So we used that in the create action, right? We learned a view helper called form4, which was also pretty complex. What made it probably more complex is I didn't have time to explain fully what it was doing. So you're kind of following along the syntax and taking for granted what it was doing. But unfortunately, that's the nature of when we only have 8 weeks to go through what we want to go through. Couple other things we talked about, what happens when you post a form. So there was some nuances there and how you submit a post request, basically. So there was a lot of stuff going on there that we learned, and hopefully you guys were able to pick it up. If you weren't able to pick it up, hopefully you were able to follow along with the code and at least get your app working. So today we are finishing off our RESTful resource and basically finishing off the majority of the coding that we will do in this course. Now, that being said, I really urge you guys not to miss the last lecture. So next week is canceled. So next week we're not having a lecture, but the week after that is the last lecture. So we're combining session 7 and session 8. Session 7, we do a lot of refactoring, okay? So again, refactoring gets tossed around a lot. Basically, refactoring means you're changing the code without effectively changing the functionality, right? So tightening up some code, drying up your code, all that kind of stuff, okay? Now, I really urge you to come to this for 2 reasons. One, it's pretty cool what we do when it comes to refactoring. For the first time ever in my life, I'm gonna start saying the word cool with refactoring. Okay, it's pretty awesome to see what you can get rid of and what you can extract and what you can do to dry up your code. And in fact, doing that, you'll realize that a lot of stuff we code actually is a little bit unnecessary. Okay, but we coded it because I want to teach you guys certain lessons about Rails and how Rails works, okay? But there's a lot of stuff we can clean up that's going to be really good. Secondly, the reason I want it's really important that you guys go through this refactoring exercise is you guys are, from here on, are probably going to, if you enjoyed it, are probably going to go on and learn other stuff. You're going to learn other Rails code, and you're going to browse other code examples, and you're going to come across stuff that doesn't look familiar, okay? Because we've never touched it in this course. In that last lecture, when we refactor, it'll be making it look a lot like regular Rails stuff. I'll give you an example. We've been using the anchor tag a lot for links, right? So href equals something, and then close the anchor tag, right? Using the anchor tag by itself in Rails is really not the preferred way of doing links, to be honest. There's a really powerful helper called link2 that we use instead all over. So if you're browsing other Rails code, you're probably seeing all this link to, and you're like, well, what the hell is that? I've never used that before, right? So little things like that will help bridge the gap between what you've done here in class and what you actually see out in the real world, okay? So those are 2 really big reasons that you want to come to that lecture. The other big reason is really which is session 8, talk about where you guys are going to go from there, okay? There's a lot of stuff we have not learned in this course, a lot, okay? I've been doing Rails for about 5 years now, and I'm still picking up new stuff, okay? And I'm talking basics. I'm still picking up new stuff in the Rails guides, like the very basic stuff that you read to get started in Rails, I'm still picking up today, right? So there's a lot of stuff in the Rails basics that we haven't covered. So what I'm gonna try to do in that session 8 is help you guys guide you to where you want to go next and what you want to research next and what you want to program next when it comes to Rails development and web development in general. Now, there was some interest in having a part 2 to this course. I'm definitely very open to that. So maybe we'll talk about that in session 8 as well, and we'll talk about potentially getting something going in the fall semester, and maybe even getting something going in the summer for those of you who are still around. We can organize some meetups. Maybe some people are anxious to keep going right away, so maybe we'll do something in the summer. Either way, we'll try to figure out something from there. Alex, there's 2 people coming in if you want to let them in. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is session 8 is a little bit open. So if there are some burning questions that you guys have about Rails development and web development, please prepare them and bring them to that lecture, and I'll try to answer as many as I can, and I'll stick around as long as I can doing that. Ideally, like I said from the beginning, you guys get excited enough about web development that you feel like you can continue and build some really cool stuff out there, okay? You're very, very, very close to building some full-blown websites, web applications. You know, again, web applications like Facebook, web applications like Uber, like Shopify, all these are built on the principles that you've learned here, okay? They're a little bit more complex, obviously, and they do a lot of fancy things, but you could effectively build the same type of application using what you've learned here, okay? There's a couple little things that you might need to learn a little further, but not too much, okay? All right, any questions before we start the formal part of this lecture? Cool, all right, again, fire up your dev environments, because we're gonna jump pretty much right into it. Okay, so where are we? We are building blog posts. Thanks to Lucia in our feedback session, we are on track and staying true to setting out to build something and set something. Today we're actually sources usually RESTful to the web. Okay, we talked about that it's very standard to use a certain set of protocols to interact in a standard way with certain resources, right? So when we talk about blog posts, we talk about if you ever do a GET request for /blog posts, what you're expecting is a list of blog posts to come back, right? When you do /blog post /new, you're expecting a form to come back so you can fill it out and create a new form, okay? These are all standard RESTful protocols and conventions, okay? Now, remember, technically, programmatically speaking, there's nothing preventing you from doing something different. You could say like get /blog posts for some random reason returns the new form, right? It could be that, but then you're kind of breaking convention and no one's gonna understand how your web app works, right? It's a lot better to follow the convention so that way when you interact with APIs and all this stuff and someone wants to interact with your app, they'll know exactly what we're doing, okay? All right, so our goal is to build this blog post. And we talked about these 7 actions, okay? We talked about get index, get show, get new, post create, get edit, patch update, and delete destroy, okay? Were the 7 things we were doing. So far to date, we have coded 4 of them, okay? We've coded the index, show, new, and create, which brings us today to close it all off with edit, update, and destroy. Okay, so what are these? Edit. All right, so edit looks like this. It's a get request. Okay, edit's a get request, and the URL that you're going to follow is /resources/id/edit. So in our case, being blog posts, it's going to be /blog posts / the ID of the blog post that you want to edit /edit. Okay. Now there's no payload in this, okay, because it's very similar to the new form. Okay. The intent of the edit action is to simply present you with a form that you can edit a certain blog post, okay? The convention is you present that form with pre-filled out information of the blog post that you're editing, right? So if I'm editing my first blog post that has a body, hey, welcome to my website, hope you enjoy it. When I go to the edit action, that form should have those title and body filled out, okay, is the kind of convention. So that way all the person has to go in is tweak it and submit it, okay? So that's what edit is. Edit is the idea to present a form to the user to edit a certain blog post. And it's handy if those fields are pre-filled out with the blog post that you're editing. Update. So update is the actual action to update the data in the database, okay? Remember, this whole thing that we're doing is we're interacting with this resource and we're making the changes to the database. When we created a blog post, okay, yes, we did instantiate it in memory, but then we called .save, right, which actually saves it to the database. When we fetched records, we went .find or .all to get records from the database to present out to the user, right? So the edit presents the form. The update is what does the actual updating in the database. So all the parameters, all the data that comes into the update action, we update the blog post, and we save that update to the database. Okay, so we're going to use a method today that actually writes this information to the database. Okay, so the payload that gets sent with this are the actual new attributes. Okay, So just like you had new and create, here you have edit and update. So the payload is the title and the body, the new title and the new body of the blog post that you want to edit, right? So if before it was my first blog post and you want to change it to my first blog post exclamation mark, right? Part of that payload is that my new blog post exclamation mark, okay? So again, very similar to new and create, right? New presented the form, and that new form, when you hit submit, posted to the create action, right? That's where we were before. Very similar story here with edit and update. Edit presents the form, you hit submit, that edit posts to the update action. Now, post is a little bit of a misnomer there, okay? In other words, I used the term wrong there a little bit because really we're using a patch action, okay? Now, here's the little interesting thing about patch. Patch is officially part of the HTTP protocol. If you went and researched HTTP protocol and the GET requests, and the requests that you can send GET, you can send put, you can send delete, you can send patch, you can send all these things. The thing is, though, browsers natively do not have a way to send these types of requests, okay, through HTML. So you'll see that Rails does a little bit of magic to simulate a patch request, but you'll see, in fact, it's actually a post request with some extra parameters. Okay, so that's the update action. And lastly, destroy. Okay, so destroy. The idea is that you send a delete request to resources/id. So in our case, it'd be /blogpost/5 or /blogpost/6, whichever one you want to delete. Okay, and then the intent here is that our controller will grab that blog post from the database, okay, and call delete on it, which deletes it from the database. Okay, you want to get in the habit of this kind of grabbing stuff into memory and using our active record model to operate. Okay, technically speaking, if you knew SQL and you knew database commands, you could directly send a command directly to the database to say delete this record. You could do that, okay? But generally, we separate those layers, okay? You'll learn once you take the database course, typically you're separating these layers of functionality. So you're not writing any database queries in the controller. All your database stuff exists in the model, and then you just use the model to execute those queries for you. So we call a method called .destroy, which sends a request to the database to actually delete that record in the database, okay? Any questions about these three actions? Okay, pretty simple stuff, right? We've done index and show, we've done create and new and create. Now we're doing edit, update, and destroy, and then our RESTful resource is complete. Okay? All right, let's get started. Let's code. Okay, we're going to start with edits. Okay, where do we start all our coding for any action in Rails? Roots.rb, right? Roots or routes.rb. Roots and routes is one of those weird pronunciations that seems to like be so weird in computer science, software engineering, because like I very, very often say, go take that route, but I never say a router, right? I always say a router. And the first time my security teacher said router, I was like, that guy's an idiot. But no, wait, that makes perfect sense for him to say router instead of router. All right, so we'll go to roots.rb or routes.rb. So let's create a new route. Okay. Following our convention, we're going to return a form, and it's going to be a GET request, okay? So we have a GET request, and it's going to be to /blogposts, okay? And we're going to have a dynamic part of our route, just like in show. The ID of the post that we're actually editing, /edit, okay? So it would be like /blogpost/5/edit. Okay. That's going to forward to our controller and action. Okay. So what controller are we forwarding to? Blog posts. Good. Alex, when you're done helping that guy, give that guy a sticker. Blog posts. All right. And we're going to create yet another action for this. Okay. Remember, we can reuse actions if we want, but this one we're going to create a new one. Okay. So this is going to forward to the edit action.
I have a question.
Yes.
Should we put it before the show action, or it doesn't matter?
Should we put it before the show action? Good question. So the show action is here. Should we put it before that? So very good question, because this came up in the past, right, where we had conflicts. And I always said it matched from top to bottom, right? Now, we had the issue before before with new, right? Because they're both get requests and they both match same. Same thing here. They're both get requests. They both start with /blog post. Is it possible that this :id/edit is going to match the :id? Very good question. It's not because of the slashes. So Rails is smart enough to differentiate when you have those slashes. Because this is // it's expecting 2 arguments basically there. Whereas here it's only expecting 1 argument. It doesn't consider this whole thing as a match to that. Very good question, though. Okay, the other thing we have to add, which unfortunately, again, I can't explain in this in this 8-week course, is we have to add one identifier to our show path, to our show route. And again, you can go through your entire Rails development without knowing this, because I'm going to show you something in lecture 8 that's going to make this obsolete anyways, okay? But in this case, while we're teaching, we do need to add something here. We do need to add an argument here, okay? And the argument's going to be a hash. Okay, so remember what hashes look like, right? It's a symbol, colon, and then the value. So the symbol is going to be as, okay? And the value is going to be the blog post symbol. Again, I'm going to restrain myself explaining that. It doesn't really matter in this case, okay? But we do need it for this whole thing to function. Okay, as blog post. Okay, so back to our route. Blog post ID edit, blog post edit. Okay, where do we go next? Controller, awesome. So Command P or Control P, blog post controller. We have the index action, show action, new, and create. We don't have an edit action, so let's create a new action for edit. Def tab edit. Let me bring this up for you guys. Okay, def edit. At the end of every controller action, what is something that we have to do? We have to render, right? Because we need to adhere to the HTTP protocol, which means we have to return a response. Render is one of those methods that returns a response. We learned last week that redirect to is another command that returns a response, okay? So render. And we are going to create yet another view for this, okay? And we're going to call it edit. Okay, so render is just a method that takes in the name of a template. Okay. Now, we are going to set up an instance variable here. Remember, any data that you need in your view, it's good practice to set that up in the controller. That's one of the main reasons we have a controller, okay? To set up data that we need in the view, okay? So we are going to edit the blog post, okay, that matches the ID that's passed in through the URL. Okay, we have /blog post /ID /edit. So that ID that's in there, we need to find a blog post with that ID, and that's what we're going to edit. Okay, so how do we access that ID in the URL in our controller? Params. Okay, good. Okay, remember, params does a lot of stuff. Okay, one of the things it does is it encapsulates any dynamic part of your route. Okay, if you call it :ID, it's going to have a key called :ID. If you had :whatever, you would have a key called :whatever. Okay, we call it :ID, it's going to come in there. Remember, params does a lot of other stuff. It actually encapsulates post data and stuff like that. But in this case, we just need the ID. Okay, so we need to find a blog post with the ID passing from params. Okay, so let's say the ID that we're looking for comes in from params. Okay, so just create a variable called ID and give it the value of whatever comes in from params. Okay, and let's grab a blog post that has that ID. So active record gives us a free method called .find, which is a static method, okay, or class level method. Okay, so we specify the class .find, and that takes in an ID. And that'll return a blog post with that ID. Again, those of us who are database savvy, that's actually doing a select statement with that ID and returning that blog post into an instance of that active record. Okay. Again, we are Rubyists. We are minimalists. This stupid temporary variable assignment is useless. So let's just replace ID here with params ID. We don't need that temporary variable assignment. Okay, if I want to use that blog post in the view that I'm rendering, what do I need to do? Right? Make it an instance variable. Because right now it's not accessible in the views, okay? And again, you don't have to make all your variables instance variables, only the ones you need access to in the view that you're rendering, okay? So we just put an @ in front of it. That makes it an instance variable. And instance variables of controllers are accessible in the views that you render, okay? So we're rendering the edit, so that @ blog post is going to be accessible in render edit. Okay, we got all our data set up. We're going to render the edit. Where is edit going to be found?
Views, blog posts.
Perfect, views blog post, right? So we go to our views, we go to our blog posts. We don't have an edit template yet. Okay, so let's right click and create a new file and save it. Remember, Sublime can be finicky, so make sure you're saving to the right place. Edit.html.erb. Okay, so now we have our edit. We have our edit view ready to go. Okay, so now that we have that ready to go, let's just put some temporary HTML in there so we can see if this is all working. Okay, so I'm just going to put a header in there, call it edit blog post. Okay. Now this is enough for me to make sure my whole routing is working. Okay, that the route hits the routes file, goes to the controller, renders the view, and spits it back to the browser. That's enough. Okay, so let's fire up our Rails server. Okay, Rails server fired up. Make sure all your files are saved. Okay, now remember what our route is. Our route is /blog posts /ID/edit. And then what does our controller action do is it finds a blog post with that ID. Okay, that find method throws an exception if the blog post doesn't exist for that ID. So in other words, if you try to find a blog post with a certain ID that doesn't exist in the database, it's going to give you an exception. So you got to find one of your blog posts that actually has that ID. Okay, so let's bring up our website. Go to the blog. Now remember, all these have IDs. I just need to find out what IDs those are. A couple ways you can do that. You're gonna have to click on view full post, and you see the ID up in the URL, right? ID 2, or the next one, ID 3, or you can just hover on that link, and you should be able to see the ID and the URL on the bottom, right? Okay, so let's test this out. So I have blog post /2. So all I have to do is go to /edit, and that'll match the route for editing blog post 2, right? So let's do /edit. There we go. Our HTML is working, okay? This is one thing I like to do. I gotta get in the habit of as I program to make sure that whole routing system works first. And once I'm there, then I start to flesh out the actual HTML of that. Okay? All right, so let's flesh out the HTML. Okay, so we're going to do something very similar to our create template. Our create template uses a form for. We're actually going to use that exact same method to spit out a form builder that'll help us build the form properly. Remember, the advantage of using form for is it names all your fields properly, puts them in a form, submits it to the right place, does everything for you. Okay, so we're going to use the same thing here. So server-side tags. Okay. Form for. It's going to take in one argument, and it's going to spit out a form builder. It's going to spit out a form filter that we can use in between this block here. Okay, form for takes an object. It's like you're literally creating a form for that object. That's why it's called form for, right? Okay, the object that we're going to base the form on is the blog post that we created. Okay, so the blog post that we created was grabbing it from the database for that ID. So we created that blog post in memory. We're going to use that blog post to create our form now. So because @blog post is accessible on our form, all we have to do is just fill it in there. Then we can use that form builder to create our labels and our text fields and our text areas and whatnot. Okay. So let's create a label and a text field for title, and a label and a text area for body. Okay. So f.label for the title, and we'll create a break to put onto the new line. f.text field for the title as well. Again, what that's going to do is create a text field that is named properly, so that on the other side of Rails, the params can accept it and massage it all properly. Okay. The break is just a regular HTML break, so to put it onto a new line. All right, and then let's do the same thing for the body of the blog post. Okay, and last thing we need in a form is always a submit button. Okay, so the form builder allows us to build off that as well. So we can just do f.submit. Now again, I like my fields, like my label and my input field, that grouping, to be kind of in separate divisions, to kind of be separate areas of the website. So I'm just going to surround those with div tags. Okay. So this is purely a styling thing. Okay, this doesn't actually affect any functionality. So I'm just going to put a div around my top field there, and a div around my bottom field. That just ensures that they're in separate divisions. By default, each division is on a new line, so it kind of puts them on separate lines nicely, basically. Purely a styling thing. Again, we don't really cover CSS in here, but I like to usually give my divs a class. So for those who have done CSS, I usually give that div class field. I just call it class equals field. Okay. But again, CSS is not covering this course, so we won't do that. All right, so there's our form. All right. So let's take a look and see what it looks like. So back on the /blog post /2/edit. I'm just going to refresh the page. And there we go. You now have a form that has a label for title, a text field for title, label for body, text area for body. And what's really cool is that it pre-fills out the values that were on blog post. Okay, whatever like blog post you're on, it's sitting on there. Okay, so my first blog post, this was a great day. Now again, the really big advantage to using form for, right, is the HTML that it generates. Okay, when I go look at if I go look at the page source, okay, this is the HTML it actually generates. And we went over this last week. The way it names things, like blog post, square bracket, body, square bracket, okay? Or blog post, square bracket, title, square bracket. This helps Rails massage everything into that params hash, okay? Because it's named this way, okay? When you submit this form to Rails, Rails will throw it into that params hash, so we can use that params hash easily. Okay. Otherwise, we'd have to manually extract each of these values and assign it to the object. Okay. And then the other thing is, again, it sets up where it's going to actually post to. Okay. So this is going to send a request to /blog post /2. Okay. It's going to send a request to that URL. Okay. Of type post. Okay, now that's not quite what we're looking for when we're creating an update. This is the edit form that's going to remember, submit a request to the update. When we submit a request to the update, we're actually looking for patch, not post. Okay, so why can't we just put patch in there? Again, unfortunately, most browsers and HTML don't support patch as a request method in form. Okay, so Rails does a little bit of fancy magic behind the scenes that you don't really have to worry about, but it all has to do with that they actually insert this input, this hidden input in there of value patch. Okay, this is all Rails side. Okay, if you put that little hidden input method value patch in any other system, it won't necessarily work. Rails just knows how to interpret that on the other side. Okay, but long story short, you now have your edit form all properly coded. Okay, all right, we're done edit. All right, now let's move on to the next one, which is update. Okay, so where do we start? Roots. Okay, so let's go to the roots file. This is going to be a patch request. We're going to patch to the blog post with a certain ID. Double check for conflicts. This one's an easy check because there's no other patch request that we've written, right? So there can't be any conflicts with any other routes at this point. Okay, that's going to hit our controller, and it's going to hit the update action. So we're going to create yet another action. Update action. Okay, where do we go from there? Controller. All right, so let's go to the controller. This is good. You guys are getting in this habit. So we create an update action. Now, the theory here, the algorithm that we're going to use, okay, the algorithm that we use for everything that we do when we talk about full stack database applications, okay, is always get the thing into memory first and operate on that thing in memory and then save that to the database. Okay, so let's get the thing in memory first. Okay, so let's get the blog post that we're going to be working with in memory first. Okay, so blog post equals, okay. Now, how are we going to get that blog post? Params, right? Because it's part of the URL again, right? If we look at our routes, this also has that dynamic ID in there, okay? So, blog post dot find params ID. Now, part of the complex lesson of last week, and actually I probably have time to repeat it this week. So part of the complex lesson of last week, there was two things. One was called strong parameters, and the other thing was using a hash. Okay, so last week we looked at this create method here, and I kind of highlighted this blog post.new. So I mentioned to you guys last week that blog post.new without any parameters is just like your default constructor, right? Just like in Java, you create default constructors that take in no parameters. Sometimes also in Java, you create constructors that take in all your instance variable values, right? You may have a person constructor that takes in age, hair color, eye color, whatever, right? And then you kind of assign those instance variables. So active record gives us both of these. Well, Ruby gives us the default constructor. Every object has the .new, okay? And active record actually allows us to pass in a hash of variables to assign to the instance variables of that active record, okay? So blog post, we have title and we have body. If we pass in a hash that has a title symbol and a body symbol, it'll create that for us, right? So remember, it kind of looked like this. So this here, this line right here, okay, kind of looks like this. Okay, where blog post params is just a hash, and the hash has a title and a body. And whatever that title and body is, we'll assign to the instance variables of that. Okay, That was the .new. The other thing to note about this, and that I taught you guys last week, was we couldn't just pass in a hash blindfolded. Okay, we couldn't just blindly pass that in because the issue was this is a mass assignment. This is a mass assignment method. .new is a mass assignment method, and if you pass in a hash just blindly into that, Rails is going to complain and say you haven't whitelisted these parameters. All right, and that's a security feature of Rails. It says it's forcing developers to say you have to let me know exactly what you want to allow to be mass assigned. Okay, that was one of the bigger lessons last week. We're doing the exact same thing this week with update. Okay, so update is a method that you can call on active record. And it takes in a hash. Okay? It takes in a hash that needs to have the symbols title and body because this is a blog post, right? So this takes in a hash that would take in a title and the body. But just like new, this is a mass assignment method. Okay? So we can't just blindly pass in our params. We have to sanitize them first. Okay? So let's create a new variable out here called blog post params. Okay? And we start with our regular params hash. Okay? And we call require blog post permit title and body. What that does is it sets flags on the params to say these have now been whitelisted. You can go forward. Yeah.
Can you guys see this all? Do you want this font a little bit bigger or? Good. Good.
So again, that's called strong params or strong parameters. Okay. But basically, the way you can look at it is it's just a regular hash with certain flags that say, I've now checked this. You're okay to use this in a mass assignment method now. Okay. Now, specifically what we've coded here is it basically says that if the params doesn't actually have a blog post in it, okay, then kill it. Doesn't work. Okay, that's what the require means. They'll throw an exception. They'll say you're missing a parameter. And then the .permit, okay, what that does is it whitelists parameters. So if you had 50 parameters that you're sending in, only title and body would be allowed through. Okay. Now this, whitelisted, checked, approved params, that we can use in a mass assignment method. Okay. So in this update here, we're going to use blog post params. Okay, now the .update method actually does two things at once. Okay, the .update method updates the object in memory and then calls .save to the database. Does it all in one step. Okay, so what this is going to do is whatever we pass in as the title and body is going to update that blog post in memory and call .save to the database. Okay, and it returns a true or false depending if it's successful or not. Okay, so we can just test that if it was successful or not. Okay, if it's successful, we're going to do something. If it's not successful, we do something else. A lot of different routes you could go here in terms of usability. Okay, you guys as software engineers and UI designers and UX designers have to figure out what you want to do. The convention is if the edit fails, that you just present them the same form again. And you say, hey, look, this failed. Please try again, basically. Okay? So if it does fail, what we're going to do is we are going to render the exact same edit form that's submitted in the first place. We're reusing that exact same form that we used in the edit. Okay? So we're reusing that exact same code. Remember, your templates don't have to match your actions. Okay? Just a lot of times, it's easier to keep track of if they are named the same. Now let's stay on that for a second. If the blog post fails to update, we're going to render the edit method. Okay? Or sorry, edit template. We're going to show them the edit template. All right? There is something wrong here. Does anybody know? Yeah.
We need to add the at before blog post.
We need to add the at before the blog post, exactly. Okay. Now, if we were doing anything else here, we wouldn't need that. But we're going to render this edit method potentially. Like we actually don't need that at sign anywhere up until that point. But in this one little case, okay, this one little case where we actually need that instance variable, we better make sure it's actually accessible for that edit method. Okay. So one could argue, that you might want to do something like this. And you know what? In my opinion, that is clearer. Okay? Because it's only in that case that we actually need that blog post variable, right? That instance variable. Okay? But Rails developers are a little bit lazy. So anytime you see this code, they actually use the at all the way throughout. Okay? And you may do something in the successful one that uses that as well. Okay? It's potential. So they just put at all the way throughout here. Okay? And in the case that it fails, it'll jump down to there. Okay, in the chance that it's successfully edited, okay, the convention is that you just show them the show page of that blog post. So you can successfully show them edited. You can picture like you're looking at a Facebook user profile. You go to edit that profile. When you hit submit, it updates it and then redirects you back to that user profile page, right? So you can see your changes. Same thing here. You're editing a blog post, forward to that blog post to show that those changes were made, okay? So we are going to redirect to that blog post. I'm going to show you guys something last week that blew up in my face, but I'm going to teach it to you today. Okay, so here we're concatenating strings, right? So this just becomes slash blog post slash this ID, and 2s means toString, okay? Ruby will complain that you haven't converted to a string if you try to concatenate, because it's trying to ask you, are you adding this to it? Like, are you adding an integer to a string, or are you concatenating a string to an integer? I don't know. So better convert to a string first, and now we know, oh, we're just doing concatenations, okay? It's really rare that you see this kind of concatenation in Rails because we have something called string interpolation. Okay? String interpolation just allows you to place Ruby code inside a string so you don't have to do a concatenation. Okay? The way it works is you do a hash or pound with curly braces, and anything in those curly braces can be Ruby code. Okay? So I'm just going to put some Ruby code in here, blog post.id. And the nice thing about this is you don't have to explicitly call 2s on any of this, because string interpolation automatically converts anything in that to a string. Okay. One catch to string interpolation. String interpolation only works with the double quotations. Okay. So these double quotations here, that'll only work with string interpolation. Single quotations, okay, means literally what you type. So if I were to do this, okay, it doesn't interpolate anything. It reads it exactly as you typed it. So this would redirect to a URL that says slash blog post pound curly brace space at blog post.id space curly brace, so on. Okay, that's the main difference between single quotation and double quotation in Ruby. Okay. All right, I think we're done the update. So what happened? Once we get a request that comes into here, we find the blog post with that certain ID. We sanitize the parameters. We call update with those parameters, which is going to do two things. It's going to update it in memory and then call save to the database. Once it's saved to the database, we just redirect to that specific blog post. Okay? All right, let's see if that worked. Okay, so I'm on the edit page here. Okay? my first blog post. This was a great day, getting a little sweaty. So I don't know what I was doing that day. Chrome and Safari and modern browsers have this nice little adjustable text area, which is kind of nice. Okay, so this is a little bit weird, so I'm not going to change this body here. My first blog post, welcome to my awesome website. Okay, and I'm going to change the name of my first blog post too to like welcome. Okay, blogtastic. All right, blogtastic, yeah. Okay, and hit update. Boom, forwards me to that show page, blog post /2, welcome blog post, okay? Now remember, redirect is an entirely new request. This is one of the big things I wanted you guys to learn last week, okay? When we got a redirect, this actually made 2 requests. The first request was to the update, and then I got a redirect instruction back, and then I sent another request to this get here, okay? So there we go, we can edit any blog post we want now. Now, it's a little cumbersome to type the URLs back and forth, so let's create a little edit link for the people, okay? Now, you can do this in any place you want, okay? I'm going to do it directly on the index page, okay? Some people might put it on the show page, you know, because it's not until you get into the full blog post that you want them to be able to edit. You know, it depends what your user experience is. Maybe you want to put it in both, okay? I'm going to put it directly on the index page next to every blog post. So I already have view blog post. Next to it, I'm going to put a little edit button, okay? So let's go to our index page. So if you go to blog post /index, okay, we already have a link here for view full post. Let's put in a new link. /blog posts /blog post.id /edit. And we'll just call it edit. Don't let the syntax highlighting fool you. Remember, anything that's in these server-side tags gets interpreted by the ERB processor, right? So it transforms that into plain HTML. So whatever that evaluates to, which is the number 3 or 4 or whatever, that 3 or number 4 just gets put right in there. Okay. Refresh your page. So now my index has view full post and edits. Okay. So I can click on edit to edit welcome blogtastic. This is amazing. All right. I can edit one of these ones down here. My third blog post. Hey, Krusty here. It's getting hard to be creative creating test data. There we go. Okay. You can jump all around. Okay, awesome. That is the update method. Or action, sorry. So we've done the edit action, we've done the update action. We have one last one left called destroy. So let's do that. Where do we start? Roots. Bloody roots. All right, so this is going to be a delete request. Okay, so HTTP protocol has a request called delete, a type of delete. Okay, and this is what the route looks like. Again, there's no conflict because it's a type delete, so we don't have to worry about that. Very similar to some other URLs, but it's a different type, so we're okay. And this is going to forward to the blog posts controller, the delete action. You can see now why every time you type double quotes, when you type a hash in there, Sublime will autocomplete with the curly braces. Because if you're using double quotes, it's thinking, oh, you must be doing string interpolation. Okay? So all throughout this routes page, actually, if you use single quotations, you never would have had to hit backspace when you hit pound. I'm so used to typing double quotations all the time, so.
But you could do it with single?
Yep. So single quotation, double quotations, again, perfectly interchangeable as strings. They're both treated the exact same. The only difference is that interpolation. You can't do interpolation with single quotations. So if you're not doing interpolation anyways, all these strings could have been single quotations. the magic of Sublime, you can do stuff like this. But Command D, be your best friend in Sublime. Command D allows you to multi-select things and edit multiple things at the same time. It's really handy. Okay, that was a little bit of a side. Back to what we're doing here. All right, routes. Delete blog post ID, blog post delete. Where do we go next? Controller. Let's head to the controller. Create a destroy action. Did I just type delete instead of destroy? Sorry. It should be called destroy, not delete. Let's fix that. Sorry. The action itself is called destroy. When you get deeper into Rails, you'll basically know the difference between delete and destroy. Destroy will execute callbacks and any extra cleanup that you need to do, whereas delete doesn't. Not a big deal for this class. Okay, destroy. But the method is still called delete. Okay, there's no such HTTP type of request called destroy. Okay, so the type of request is still delete. Okay, so that's going to forward to our destroy action. So we need a destroy action. So same thing. Grab something out of the database so you can operate on it, and then operate on it. Okay, that's always the first step, is grabbing stuff out of the database so you can operate on it. So let's grab that thing out of the database. Remember, params ID is coming from the URL. Blog post has a static method called .find, or a class level method called .find. It's going to grab a blog post from the database, load it up into a blog post object, and assign it to wherever you assign the variable to. Okay. Then active record has a method called .destroy, which is going to send a command to the database to destroy that that blog post. Now it's kind of interesting, again, if like I was thinking about this a little bit today and about what I was going to say about this. It's kind of interesting because you're getting the record out of the database in order to destroy it, right? It's a little bit funny thinking. But again, when we're operating at the controller level, we're just dealing with models. We don't deal with the database directly. So the only way we can interact with the database is if we have that object from the database in the first place, right? So we have to get it out of the database, and only then can we call destroy on it. But the .destroy is what actually sends the command to the database to destroy that record from the database. So the next time we do a find, the next time we do an index, next time we do a show, it's not going to be there. Okay. And again, destroy, now that it's gone, let's go back to the index page. Okay. So we'll just redirect to /blog posts. Now, here is a perfect example of where we don't actually need the instance variable. Okay? Because we're not going to be using it in any view that we're rendering. And very importantly, even if we did create an instance variable, it would not be accessible in /blog posts. Okay? Does anybody want to take a stab at why? If I put an @ in front of here, okay, why wouldn't I be able to access it in /blog posts?
Is it because the current one was destroyed?
Not quite. But that's a good guess.
It's not, so you can't grab it.
Not quite. It's funny, actually, after you call destroy, it actually still exists in memory. It doesn't exist in the database anymore, but it does still exist in memory. But good guesses, good guesses. Let me give you a clue. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're destroying it. It has everything to do with the fact that we're using the redirect to. Yeah.
Maybe because it's in the root directory. I mean, the
Nope.
parent directory.
Not quite, not quite. Okay, what it has to do with is what redirect to does. Okay? Can somebody explain to me what redirect to does?
Move you to another page.
Say that again.
Move you to another page.
Move you to another page. How does it do that? So let's say you're the server, okay? And I'm the browser. Okay, and I send this request to destroy a blog post. Okay, what do you send me back based on this code?
URL.
You send me a URL, right? You don't send me a page. You just send me a URL. He just sends me instructions for the URL, right? He just sends me a little packet that comes back to me that says, hey, go to this page. He doesn't actually send me any view back. He sends me that request. Okay. Then I subsequently make another request to get that page. He says go to /blog post. So I send another request /blog posts. Okay. Instance variables are only accessible in the views of that same request that you've made. Okay. So anywhere where we call render, it's still part of that same request cycle, right? So if we call render, we can access an instance variable in there. But if we call redirect, we're in a whole nother routing cycle, right? Because I sent the initial destroy request, and then you sent me instructions to send yet another request. So that second request is a whole new cycle, right? So we're not even in this anymore by the time we get to blog posts. What happens is we get, when I go to /blog posts, what happens is now we're in a new request, and we're way up at index at that point. So these variables down there have nothing to do with that request, basically. Okay? That was the whole lesson last week, that major thing that was kind of difficult to understand. Okay? So if you don't fully understand that, go back to this diagram, basically. Okay? From last week. Okay? There's one request. Here's a second request. Okay? These are two independent requests, okay, that were initiated in two different ways. One, somebody like submitted a form. Two, somebody got a redirect response. Okay? And instance variables are never accessible across requests. Okay? I guarantee you, if you understand that, you're going to be like miles ahead, because that will bite you really hard if you don't understand that. Now, if you don't understand that, that doesn't mean you can't like become an awesome Rails programmer. So every now and then you'll get bitten by it. And you'll be like, ah, man, yeah, that's right. It's not accessible there. All right, but that's it on the destroy. We're done. We just need a delete link. Okay. So let's go to the index page. Let's add another link for delete. Okay. So I'm going to call it delete. You can call it destroy if you want. I'll call it destroy. All right, so where's this going to? /blog posts /blog post ID. Okay. Now this is a problem. Why is this a problem?
Because they're two different, and they're too similar.
They're very similar.
We're not sending a destroy method with it.
We're not sending a destroy method. Not destroy, delete. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. We're not sending a delete type request. Okay. What kind of request do links send? Sorry? Get. They send get requests, right? What kind of requests do forms by default send? Post. Right? So if we're going to create a link, how the heck do we send a delete? Okay. This is again a bit of Rails magic. Okay. By default, HTML has no way for you to send a delete request. Okay. There's ways you can do it in JavaScript. Okay. But by default, on the web, you can't create a link or a form that sends a delete request. It doesn't exist. So Rails fills in the gaps. Okay. Rails will fill in the gaps for you, and it'll say, as long as you code your link a certain way, I'll pick it up for you and convert it into a delete request. Don't worry how I do it. I'm going to do that for you. Okay. The way they do that is if you put a data method on your link, it'll pick it up. Okay. So if you put in a data method variable on the link, okay, you can call it delete. Okay. Rails is going to pick that up. Rails does a lot of fancy stuff. And to be honest, this is one of the reasons people hate Rails. And one of the reasons people stay away from Rails. And very legitimately, people like just say Rails is really terrible. Okay, it's a legitimate thing. Because Rails does a lot of stuff without the user knowing a lot. Okay? Without even the programmer knowing. Okay? Like doing things like this for years, I had no idea how this was working. Okay, I just took it for granted that Rails was doing it. Yes, question.
Can you please repeat it how it works?
How this works?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this is a link, right? This is a regular HTML link, and this has a method here called delete on it. Okay. If you're coding this in any other language, that data method wouldn't make a difference. HTML allows you to put any arbitrary number of attributes on a tag. Doesn't really matter. So you put that in there, it wouldn't make a difference. What Rails is doing, though, is that Rails is going to pick up any link that has the data method on it. Okay? Rails has some extra bit of code that sits on every page. Okay? Just by using the Rails framework, it's put in there for you. Okay? It's called UJS, unobtrusive JavaScript. And what Rails does is it looks for any link on your page that has a data method. And what it does is it constructs a JavaScript request. And in JavaScript, you can send things like delete requests. Actually, it's not even that. That's not even fully explaining it right. To go even a little further, Rails, what it does is it constructs a form and attaches a method variable in that form that later on Rails on the server side interprets that. So even though you're sending a regular request here, I think Rails sends it as a post request. On the Rails server side, it gets that request in and says, oh, you actually sent a post request, and there's a variable in here called method with the word delete in it. I'm going to treat that as a delete request before I send it to the routes method. So basically what's happening is Rails is taking this link, and it's doing a fancy construction of a form and submitting that for you. Okay? It's kind of crazy. Like, it actually constructs a full form for you and submits that form for you. Okay? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is scattered throughout a lot of Rails. Rails is analyzing things like this all the time. And when you click on it, it intercepts that default behavior and does its own behavior at that point. Okay? I think it's called Rails UJS, if you're interested in more. It's really, really powerful stuff, actually. Okay? All right, any questions? Long story short, if you want to submit a delete request using a link, all you have to do is data method delete, and it'll do it. Okay? All right, let's try it out. That was getting dangerously close to explaining too much that is needed in this course. That's a good question, though. All right, so let's check out if destroy works. All right, so let's see here. My next new post, destroy. Okay, and it's gone. Down to 4 blog posts. Okay. My 4th blog post, let's get rid of that too. Let's get rid of them all because I can now fully interact with this thing as much as I want. 0 blog posts. Let's create a new blog post. What day is it? March 29th? There we go. Okay.
Is there any way, if, for example, we want to undo an action, for example, edit or destroy, do we have to do it ourselves?
Right. If you want to undo, the question was, is there any way we can undo an edit or destroy? By default, no. Okay. So this is where software engineering kicks in, right? You start to have to think to yourself, how would you implement an undo, right? Maybe you store different versions of the blog post, right? Maybe every time you hit edit, it doesn't actually edit the current blog post, but creates a brand new blog post and populates those fields and stuff like that. And if you hit undo, it actually goes back to the old blog post, things like that. Yeah, by default, no, there's no way to do it. Sorry, by default, no, it's not implemented. Undo and things like that is a big software engineering challenge, actually. I was actually working on a project for one of the companies I previously worked for, and me and, again, one of the best software engineers I know spent like 2-3 days straight just ironing out how to do undo and redo and stuff like that. Not that it has to be that complex, but there are a lot of things that you have to think about when it comes to undo and redo and stuff like that. And it was in a live collaboration environment too, which was like kind of messy. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, kind of. So like when you like delete a blog post and when you create a new one, it doesn't like reuse the ID. It like
It's a brand new ID. Okay, because again, the idea, the convention, is that every blog post in history has a unique ID, right? Now, if you want, again, to override the defaults and override conventions, you can do that. But the idea is that you always have, like, every single blog post in the history of all the time has a unique ID, right? Which is generally a pretty good practice. Because if you're thinking about, like, if you think about building a data system, like, say, building, I don't know, a purchase system, right? Like e-commerce, like Shopify, right? And you're building invoices, right? Invoices typically have an ID. And if you were to ever reuse an ID, you could think about all the implications that could happen, right? It's like, oh yeah, no, I purchased this this watch, and it was $200, and all my invoice IDs da 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 da, right? And let's say someone else bought the watch same time, and then there was a delete or whatever of the old invoice, and that new invoice uses that same invoice, not same ID number. You might have issues going back and forth, right? So it's a very good convention, and by default, Rails has that built into every active record model you use. Okay, every active record model you build has a unique ID that's incremental. Okay, on every create. Okay, but not to say there are definitely cases where you might say, no, I want to reuse IDs. Then it's just a matter of overriding Rails defaults. Okay.
The most common is the for each one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't run into a case where I've ever wanted to override that functionality. The only thing I've come that's kind of similar to that is not using an ID. Like, there are certain cases where I don't have an ID on certain records. It usually has to do with join tables. But it's very rare that I've ever, not very rare. I've never, ever overwritten that default functionality of an incremental ID. Okay. All right. So that is your RESTful resource. Clap for yourselves. Okay. So we have a little bit of time left. Let me just make sure I didn't forget anything. Update. Destroy. Redirect. Yeah, we're good. Look, congrats. Okay, so that's good. So I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm just going to show you guys a couple things because I don't necessarily want this on the recording. I'm not going to dive into session 7 and 8 right now because, again, in case the people who want to go to that miss this lecture, I'm not going to start that early. So I'm going to stop the recording. But I want to give you guys samples of RESTful resources and show what is possible for what you guys can build today. Okay? So thank you, Internet. We'll see you later.